Hello, today I'm responding to another request I've had, and this was for an indicator that is quite commonly found on the internet, but the programming might be interesting for you. The request was to show time zone ranges on screen. So as you can see here, I've got just boxes where I'm showing the US, Asia and Europe time zones, and they're repeating again for the next day. These indicators will typically allow you to enter all three time zones. I'm taking a slightly different approach. I'm creating an indicator that lets you enter one zone because you may not want the entire time zone. You might want all kinds of different reasons for this, possibly for a London breakout strategy type thing. So I'm creating an indicator that you only enter a single zone and then you simply add more than one of them to the screen. So if I right click here and bring up the indicators, you can see that I have three of these and each one of them has different properties. So we're going to be creating that indicator today. It's relatively simple. There is some interesting coding in there and you'll be able to adapt it to other purposes if you need to. At the editor open here, this is the Metatrader 4 editor, and as usual I'm going to be writing both Metatrader 4 and 5. Usually what I would do here is go to Indicators, Orchard. I would create a folder for my indicator and then create the files using the wizard with the new file and go through these prompts. And if you've seen me do that, you'll have seen that I then reformat the resulting file because I really don't like the format that creates. Way back you used to be able to modify the templates used for those files, but that feature has gone long ago. But something I often do, I just don't show it in the videos. Here you can see I have the Files tab in the editor. I can open that and I have my Orchard and I have templates, and in here I have some templates for what I call blank indicator. That's just the template name. If I just click that and hold the control key, I can drag that into the Orchard folder and makes a copy, and then I can simply rename this blank indicator. I'm going to call this time zone range. I'll just copy that before I hit enter. And then I can simply paste that name onto these. And now I have made a copy of my templates, and these templates are already set up as I would like them. And of course I could create more of these template folders if I like in different formats. The only thing remaining to do here, now that I have these, is to simply replace these strings. And again, I'm just pasting. And that's it. So now these are in the format that I normally create. I have an MQ4 file called Timezone Range, an MQ5 file, and these two files just contain the basic property statements and a small comment block. And then this include statement for time zone range, because the code for this between Metatrader 4 and 5 is going to be the same. And that way, if I simply compile the MQ4 file, it will bring in the timezone range.mqh, this file, and compile, and I can compile the Metatrader 5 version. And if I make any changes, everything goes in this timezone range.mqh file, and I only need to make the changes once. The timezone range.mqh, I've reproduced all of that heading information. It's probably not necessary in the MQH file, but I just find it convenient. And this already has the onInit function, the onDinit, onTimer, and onCalculate. And of course you can add more functions into these templates if you want to. So now let's begin adding the code. Now the aim here is to display time zone ranges on chart. So I'm going to need two inputs, the start time and the end time. And you may have seen me do this before. I'm entering these as strings, and I'm putting the format here as hours, minutes, and I'm writing that in the comment here so that people can see what I expect. And I'll convert those strings to hours and minutes later in the code. And because I'm going to convert those to actual times, I'm going to create two more global variables. So a start time that will hold the time converted value of this string, and an end time that will be the converted value of this string. And now I can move into the onInit function. I want to check that the start and end times are valid and haven't been just left at the default values of 0, because it makes no sense to have the same start and end time. You simply can't draw a range. So first thing I'm going to check is that these two are different. And that's as simple as just saying if the input start time is the same as the input end string equals, then I'll just print a message, start and end times must be different. And by returning init parameters incorrect, the indicator will simply terminate at that point. And now that I know they're at least different, I want to convert these strings to times. And of course, they may not be valid. The end user may have typed something that's complete rubbish here. So I'm also going to validate that they are a valid time in the format hours, minutes. I've just put 2 lines here so far, start time equals and end time equals, and this valid string to time. And I pass into that this input start time string and the input end time string. So that's a function that I'm going to write, and I'll jump straight into that now. So it's a function, it returns a date time, valid string to time, takes a string input, which is the time string. First thing here is to capture the current date and time. So the time current gives the current server time. Everything I'm doing here will be based on the server time. And I'm just capturing that into a variable called now. And then I compute a result based on this time string. And the reason I captured the current time is that if I simply use string to time on this time string, and it only contains hours and minutes, then this result will have a date component which is based on the compile date of this application. That's not really a problem because we'll sort it out later, but I might as well make that date as close to today as possible. And so I'm using now to get today's date. So I simply use string to time, and I'm creating a concatenated time by taking time to string of that now with only the date component, time underscore date, plus, and then a space separator, and then the time string. So this contents of the string to time will be today's date plus the hours and minutes in the time string. And I use string to time. Now string to time will always give a result, but it may not be correct. If the value in time string is completely incorrect, this will give an invalid time or an incorrect time. But I'll capture that time into results. So the next thing I want to do is test that it was a valid time. And that's as simple. In this case, I'm using time to string then. So I'm reversing the calculation, passing result into time to string, and just getting time underscore minutes. So this will eliminate the date component, and it will just return the time in hours and minutes format, hours colon minutes. And I store that in a variable called test. And if the time string that's been passed in initially is a valid hours and minutes time, then test will be the same as that time string. So then I do a simple test. If test is not equal to time string, then it means that somehow in all of this I haven't been able to convert the time string to a time and back again. And then I set result to 0, which is still a valid date time. 0 is the very first date and time, but it's probably not a time that you're going to be setting. So I'm assuming that a result of 0 means that the valid string to time failed. And then I just return result. So if this test means that the string passed in is invalid, then this will return a 0. Otherwise, it will return this converted string to time value. And then back up to the onInit function. I've captured a start time and an end time, but I haven't tested that they're valid. And I do a conditional here. If start time is equal to 0, then it means the start time conversion failed. Or if end time is equal to 0, then the end time conversion failed. If either of those are true, then I simply print a statement, need to enter valid in start and end times, and then return init parameters incorrect again, which will terminate the indicator. Now something else I need to do with the end time. The end time I'm assuming in my indicator here is not inclusive. So if you want to end at 0600, then you're actually including 0559. So I'm simply going to back up the end time by 1 minute. And that's as simple as saying end time minus equals 60 seconds. And now that I have a start and an end time, and they are in a valid hours and minutes format, and because they're date times, they will include a date component. But what I want to do is make sure that they are close to the current time. So if I'm in between the start and end times now, then I want that start time to be the most recent start time before now, and the end time to be the very next end time. And because I'm just starting the indicator, if I'm not inside that window, then I want the start and end time to be the most recent start and end time before now, so that I can draw one box on the screen already, and then I'll move those dates and times forward by 1 day and wait for the next iteration. So I have another function that I'll write. Let me just call that first. So I'm getting now again, that's time current, and I'm passing that into a function that I call shift time, and passing in that now. So let's write the shift time function. So here's my shift time function, and it's a void because I'm simply modifying the start and end dates, which are already global variables. So I don't need to return anything from shift time. And that takes a single argument, which is now. Now that doesn't have to be actually now, it could be any time, although in this particular indicator, it's always going to be the current time. And the purpose of shift time is that it will move the start and end times to match this time. So step 1 will be to move the start time to the next nearest time before now. And I'm going to do that with a for statement, but this will look a little different to the for statements you might be used to. So let me explain this. You're used to for statements that would say something like for I equals 0, while I is less than count, and increment I plus plus, and so on. The three components of a for statement are the initialization, semicolon, condition, termination condition, semicolon, and then an action that is performed at the end of the loop. In my case, I have no initialization. Start time is already set up, so I'm simply leaving that initialization section empty and putting the semicolon. I have one condition, while the start time is less than now. So that's simple enough. That goes in the condition statement here, and then just start time plus equals 86,400, which is 1 day. So that's a completely valid for statement, although I have no initialization here. And because I have no loop to perform, all the work is being done here in this one statement. I haven't included the brackets here at all. I just don't need that loop. So this is a completely valid for statement. And as long as start time is less than the now that's been passed in, it will just keep moving start time forward by 1 day. If start time is already passed now, then it simply won't do anything here. So that gets me to a position where start time I know is later than now. And then because I'm actually looking for start time to be before now, I do the reverse. Another for statement with no initialization, but this time while start time is greater than or equal to now, and then start time minus equals 86,400. So those two statements together, if I began with a start time that's before now, it will firstly move it to the earliest start time after now, and then move it back by a day until it's before now. If it's already later, then it will simply move it back to the latest start time before now. And then I do something similar with the end time. But in the case of end time, I'm not comparing it to now, I'm comparing it to the start time. And I want the first end after the start time that's been calculated. But other than that, the syntax is the same. For no initialization, while end time is greater than start time, I'm moving it backwards to begin with. So I'm now coming up with an end time that is the latest end time before the start. And then I move it forward. While end time is less than or equal to start, I simply add a day to it. And that will give me the earliest end time after the start time. And that's the shift time function. So after all of that, I now have a start time that is the most recent start time before now. I have an end time that is the earliest end time after the start time. And by the way, this works if end time is earlier than start time, so you can span midnight with this. that code was completely valid for that situation because we're actually including the dates in here as well. So if you ran from, say, 2200 to 0200, this would still work. Now that I've done all of that, what I want to do, and I'm still in the onInit function here, I just want to draw the very first range on screen already. Now, that range may be finished if I'm already past the end time, or I might be right in the middle of that range, but I just want to draw that range once. And again, I have a function called drawRange for that. So let's have a look at the drawRange function now. In order to draw that range, I need to know the high and the low within that range, and I also need to get the bar numbers so that I can run some calculations. So the start bar, I'm using the iBar shift function, and this function will search for a bar that contains this specified start time. So I'm using the chart symbol and the chart period, so this will find the bar that contains the start time that's passed in. And the end bar function, or the end bar variable here, with the same function, iBar shift, symbol, period, but this time passing the end time. Specifying false means that this will find the nearest bar to these times, if those times aren't actually bar start times. So that will give me the two bar numbers for the start and the end bar. Next, I'm calculating bar count. You don't really need to do this. You can embed this in the next functions, but I just found since I was doing this calculation more than once, I'd capture it to a variable. And that's the number of bars that are in this range. And that's just start bar minus end bar plus 1. Now remember, end bar is the most recent bar, and it will have a lower number than start bar. So that's why start bar minus end bar plus 1. And that gives me the number of bars, which includes both the starting and the ending bar. And this is probably a good time to mention this start time and end time. If I'm running, say, a 1 hour chart and I set my start time at 10:30, then that time is going to be in the middle of the bar. Because I'm running on an hourly chart, the only highs and lows that I can look at will be the high and low for that entire hour. So when you specify these times, if you specify a time that's going to fall in the middle of bars, it's going to calculate the high and low based on the entire bar, not based on just that time frame for that period of the bar. So it's not a bad idea to set your charts to match the exact start time and end time. So then I need the high value. So double high. This is going to be the highest price that was achieved during this period of the start bar to the end bar. The high is simply the iHigh function, passing the chart symbol and period, and the bar number that contains that highest value, and that's the iHighest function. Again, symbol and period, mode high because I'm looking at the high price, bar count, which is the value that I calculated here. So I'm looking through that number of bars, beginning at the end bar. And then the low value, very similar, but this time I'm using the iLow, symbol, period, and finding the bar that contains the lowest price for symbol, period, but this time looking at the low prices with mode low, bar count, end bar. So at the end of this, I have the high and the low values for that range. So that's almost everything I need to draw a range on the screen. The one other thing I need is the name for that range, and I'm going to be just calling this at the moment range underscore, and then I'm appending the time to string of the start time. There are no extra arguments in here, so this will be date and hours and minutes coming back here. So as I'm drawing a new range each day, this will have a new name each day, which will be range underscore date and time. So that gives me a name for the range, and then I need to find if that range already exists on screen. So if I've already drawn it and I'm simply redrawing it now because the prices have changed, the range window, I can use the object find function. 0 is the current chart and passing in the range name, and that will give me the window where it finds that range. If the range doesn't exist, this range window will be a negative number. Now I don't actually need the window number. I just want to know if it's negative so that I know if this range already exists, because then I know if I have to create the range or if I have to simply modify it. So if range window comes back as a negative number, less than 0, then I need to create the range. And that's a simple object create statement. The chart number, 0 is the current chart. The name of the range, I'm going to be drawing a rectangle with obj_rectangle. The sub window for this is 0 because I'm going to be drawing on the main chart. The start time is just the start time. And as I said, this start time might be in the middle of a bar if you've specified a time that does fit in the middle of a bar, but this object create will draw from that bar number where the start time is found. And then the high price, and the other corner of the rectangle is at the end time, and the low price. Now, I guess I could have reversed the high and low because that doesn't matter. All I'm doing is drawing a rectangle on screen. So I'm assuming I'm going from top left to bottom right. And then I want to make sure that this rectangle is in the background. It should be by default, but I'm just going to force that. There's an object set integer, chart number, range name, and obj_prop_back, and I just set that to true. If it's drawn in the foreground, then you'll often just get the outline of the rectangle. So I'm pushing it into the background, and that way I'll get a filled rectangle. Now for Metatrader 5, I'm just going to set 2 additional properties. Doesn't hurt to set these in Metatrader 4, but they are needed for Metatrader 5. Now on Metatrader 4, this rectangle will get a default fill. On Metatrader 5 it doesn't, so I'm simply doing object set integer, chart, range name, obj_prop_fill, and I'm just filling that with blue for the time being. And when you bring up the objects by right-clicking on a chart and view objects, these objects for Metatrader 5 wouldn't appear in that list. You have to click the button to show all. I want it to show by default, so the property for that, object set integer, 0, range name, and that's the obj_prop_hidden. And I'm setting that to false. So when you do right-click on the chart, show objects, this will appear in that list. Now those are the statements when I'm creating the range for the first time. If the range already exists and because of ticks the high and low have changed, then I need to redraw some properties. So I'm just adjusting the size, and I have an else statement then, and that's simply object set integer, 0, range name, and I'm setting the time. Now the time has a second qualifier which is 0. So note there were 2 times when I created it, start and an end time. So time number 0 is the start time and time number 1 is the end time. So I'm setting the time 0 to the start time, and that's the latest start time that I have. I'm setting the end time, which is obj time 1, to the new end time. I'm setting the price 0 to the high and price 1 to the low. So price also has 2 values here. The start and end time are unlikely to change, but if you've been into the inputs while this range is on screen and changed those values, then it will need to redraw. So that's why I'm setting these 2. The high and the low will change quite a lot though from the time the range first appears as the price moves up and down. So these statements take care of creating the range on screen, and these will update it as there are changes. I'll just finish that function. If I now go back to the onInit, that onInit is now complete, and by the time the code reaches the end of onInit, we will have drawn the range on screen. I don't need any code in onDinit or onTimer, so I'll just leave those. I'm going to do everything in onCalculate. So in onCalculate, I want to know if I'm inside the time range and I want to draw the chart, or I want to draw the range on screen. So first I'm capturing the current time, putting that in a variable called now. And then I want to know if I've reached the end of the current range or if I'm already after the current range. So if now is greater than the end time, then I'm calling the shift time function again, passing this time end time plus 86,400, so end time plus 1 day. By doing that, it will move that entire range forward by 1 day. And the result of this will be both the start time and the end time have moved forward by a day. The next thing I want to know is the current time inside that range of start and end time. So if now is greater than or equal to start time and now is less than or equal to end time, draw range. And we've already seen the draw range. So it will draw that. As soon as now enters the start time, as soon as it's equal to start time, a range will be drawn and it will go all the way from start time out to end time, which is off to the right hand side of the chart because we haven't reached end time yet. But as more bars appear, then that range will move further and further to the left. The range will also be very narrow to begin with because high and low will typically start at the same value when the range first opens, but they'll widen fairly quickly as the prices move. So that's why we're calling draw range each time we come in here on calculate, because it will widen the range as the prices move. And that's everything needed for the timezone range.mqh. And the MQ4 and MQ5 are already complete, so I'll just go to the MQ4 and compile that. And that works, so I haven't made any syntax errors. And I'll open the MT5 editor so that I can compile the timezone. I might be able to compile that here. Yeah, MQ5 can't be compiled, but it will do a syntax check. And the syntax check says everything's fine, but I get this warning, no indicator plot defined, and that's because I'm not actually plotting anything on screen. So that's just a warning you'll have to live with because there is nothing for Metatrader 5. But that is a complete time zone range as shown in the demonstration for Metatrader 4 and 5. So that's everything for an indicator that draws a range on screen. But in the introduction I did say you may want to show more than one range, so Asia, Europe, US. And to do that, I want to make sure that the range names don't conflict and the ability to set the colors so that you can show a different color for each time zone. So I'm going to add 2 more inputs to begin with. So first the range name, and I would recommend if you're doing time zones, you would change this to something like Asia, Europe, US, and a color so that you can set a different color for each of the ranges. Now to use those, I'm in the draw range function now. First, I'm going to change this range name. I'm just going to default to range underscore. This is going to be the input range name underscore time to string. So if you give each of your indicators a different range name, then you know that they won't conflict with each other. And the next thing, Metatrader 4 will default the rectangles to a blue color. But you've now entered your own color, so I'm going to set that property as well. So I've set that with the object set integer, 0 range name, obj_prop underscore color, and the input range color. And then in this Metatrader 5 statement, I'm not going to default to blue, I'm going to use your input color there. So I'll just paste in input range color. And then it is possible for you to change the color through the inputs while this indicator is running. And if there's already a range on screen, you want to change the color of that range. So I'm going to take this statement and add them back into this else as well. So if you do change while the object is already on screen, range window will be greater than or equal to 0. It will come into this else and we'll reset the color to the input range color. Just do a quick compile there. And that's also successful. So that's all for this short tutorial. The code for this will be available to the premium subscribers for our Discord channel. The instructions in the description below for that. If you found this useful, then please click the like button, and if you want to see more of our videos, click subscribe and then click the bell icon to be notified when we release new videos. Thank you for watching.